Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Shadow Work series, where I aim to take you from a beginner to an advanced understanding of applying shadow work in daily life to resolve emotional related fixations such as chronic anxiety, depression, chronic pain, and so on. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to check out the playlist up the top here, which will come up in a card. It contains all of the videos, which I would encourage you very much so, if you're serious about this process, to watch them in a sequential order to set you up for effective shadow work. In this episode, we're talking about inquiry techniques that will integrate your emotions at a deep, thoroughgoing level for profound change in daily life. Before we get started, I want to point out this is going to be a longer video, so just keep in mind, and I would invite you to employ the techniques that we covered in episode 2 and 3 of connecting to the body and accessing your intuition to see if you feel any feelings of restlessness, of wanting to click off the video, of being frustrated and overwhelmed. See if you can actually connect to those before you act out on them, and use that inquiry. What does this emotion mean about me? And just see what happens when you connect to the words that come up with that emotion. And also, we're going to cover quite a few inquiry techniques in this video, so I would invite you just to pick maybe 1 or 2 and then get your sea legs with them in daily life. And you can always come back to this video and rewatch various techniques so that you can apply them in daily life. But before we begin as well, it's also worth thinking about, what are we even inquiring into, right? What is the emotional landscape, and what is it that leads to thoroughgoing release of emotions and deep-seated emotional integration? Well, I'm glad you asked. So essentially, this is a model that we can hold lightly, because ultimately somatic inquiry and shadow work in general is a very dynamic process. It can change on a whim, and ultimately it comes down to trusting ourselves. But especially when we're first learning this technique, it can be helpful to have a framework so that we're ensuring that we're getting used to it with some degree of a framework where we can then learn our own way eventually. So here's one way to look at this. If we examine the emotional landscape, we can see it in layers. For instance, there might be a superficial program that we inquire into when we access the body and trust our intuition, but then we can take that deeper by using an inquiry that we'll come into later in the video of what's the worst that could happen, and that can take us another layer deeper, and then we go another layer deeper, and another layer deeper, all the way down to the depths of emotional repression, into things like helplessness, unlovableness, despair, and so on. The things that our identities are built upon, which is where the emotional contraction is basically the tip of the iceberg. But with each layer, we can sort of think of it like this. We have an emotion that we inquire into, a contraction. We might ask, what does this mean about me? And our intuition surfaces a program, like, I hate this. And then we also might have resistance there. So we're feeling the body. This resistance might be there that says something like, get rid of it. Get rid of it. I don't want it. So I hate this, and get rid of it. I don't want to feel that. And then the third component is there's also utility for that being there. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in our nervous system in the first place. It's serving us in a way, which helps bring about a heartful component. So what we notice, and when we inquire into our experience, we might feel this emotion, we might feel the resistance, and when we connect to the words that are associated with it, that are velcroed to the emotion, like we talked about in the previous video, it collapses this pushing up against itself mechanism. When we connect to both sides, this collapses and the emotion can then move through. And then we might use an inquiry to go down another layer, and then another layer. And what we find by taking this slow, we don't have to go quick, we take it slow, And that allows for deep and profound and thoroughgoing emotion release and trauma release for that matter. So with that frame set up, we're now going to go into the inquiry techniques. And I just want to add a disclaimer that, again, there's quite a lot here and it might be overwhelming. And it's valuable to know that when you're really getting the hang of inquiry, it's very, very, very valuable to have a facilitator. And even if you're experienced in inquiry or any sort of investigation like this, it is immensely powerful to have somebody hold space for you. You know, I still get facilitated sometimes, and sometimes I wish that I had a facilitator more frequently, because when somebody holds space for you, there is something profound that happens that helps emotional trauma just release and be seen from the body at a much deeper level. But more than that, it also empowers us to become more fluent and dynamic when we go out and do inquiry for ourselves in daily life. So let's get into the first inquiry. And we've already talked about it. What does this emotion mean about me? This inquiry is very effective because what it does is it's general. If we access any contraction in the body, whether it be social anxiety, whether it be anger simmering in the background, whether it be sadness that's sort of lingering there as well. If you soak your attention into that emotional contraction, whatever it is, especially those incredibly squirmy sensations that you would otherwise avoid and blanket over and go into an avoidance strategy of some degree, if you soften into it, allow it to be the only thing in the whole universe, and then just drop that question, what does this emotion mean about me? And just allow your intuition to come forward. There will be words that come with that, and maybe a mental image to confirm it. Putting 50% of your attention into the words that come up and 50% into the emotion, and just repeat those words over and over again. Maybe it's, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, and you're feeling it in the body. And what you will notice, if you connect to the right words, it will start to release from the body. Now, I also mentioned that there will be resistance as well. So you're also staying curious, staying open, and you might just generally just prompt around, just see if there's anything that says, I don't want to feel this. So you can feel it in the body and just connect to that. And then you can ask, what does this emotion say about me? And it could say, I don't want to feel this. I hate this. The resistance that's pushing up against it. And we're allowing that to move through and release, just repeating the words, honoring both sides, and that will allow the emotion to release from the body. So that's the general inquiry. The next inquiry is called a reverse inquiry, a very powerful technique for sure. What we do with a reverse inquiry is, let's say that, for example, we're feeling anger in a situation. So we're feeling anger, but there's also resistance in our experience if we've repressed anger that says, I shouldn't feel this. Don't show anger. So I want to feel anger and don't show anger, right? And that can feel like we're driving with the brakes on. So in this instance, a really good way to bring up the resistance that is ultimately suppressing that anger down is we can use the reverse inquiry. We could say, I am perfectly okay expressing anger in this situation. And just see what that brings up in the body, staying open and curious to see which words might arise that accompany that. It might say, no way I can do that. There's no way I can express anger. Right? Good. You've identified the resistance that's pushing up against that anger that wants to come out. And as you allow that resistance, just repeating the words, whatever it is, and this doesn't have to just be anger. It can be anything. It can be sadness. It can be rage. It can be joy. But as you just allow those words, allow that resistance to collapse and move through, what you'll notice is it counteracts that feeling of driving with the brakes on, and that emotion will release from the body, gaining you access to a much deeper and authentic expression. Now, the reverse inquiry can also be used for essentially triggering a pattern of resistance within you so that you can work with it very directly. I used this in one of the previous videos, but if you imagine right now closing your eyes and just visualizing in front of you your parents looking at you with a neutral gaze, a reverse inquiry might be like this: I am perfectly okay being my authentic self around you. So you're imagining saying that to your parents, or anybody else that might trigger that in you. Some sort of resistance that says, no, I can't do that. And then just staying open to the words as that arises, as to what that might say if it had a voice. Could say, no, I hate this. There's no way I could show my authentic self to them. I would be humiliated. I would be humiliated, right? So you just repeat that. I would be humiliated. I would be humiliated. And just staying open and curious for any words that might arise and allowing that emotion to again release from the body until it becomes more neutral. The next inquiry we could try to take it deeper, which is how we access deeper layers of emotional repression. Once we've sort of explored that landscape, that emotional landscape, and released whatever's come up for us in the experience, we can say this: what's the worst that could happen if X? And X can just be inserting whatever emotional challenge is coming up for you and whatever is charged in experience. So for referencing that previous example, what's the worst that could happen if I was my authentic self in front of my parents and I was humiliated? You see how once we've explored both sides of the resistance and the emotion, we've sort of allowed that to release. And then we can drop that question after, once it's a bit more neutral. What's the worst that could happen if I was my authentic self and I was rejected? We're just listening, staying open and curious. And it takes us down to a deeper level of emotional repression. And now we're in another sort of layer of the emotional landscape. Again, just holding this lightly, somatic inquiry and shadow work can be very dynamic. But it might say something like this: I would be unloved. I wouldn't be accepted by them. And remember, we're staying completely open and relaxed, coming at this with fresh eyes, like a newborn baby, with no concept of past or future, and just staying curious and trusting your intuition to answer that question as it arises. You might be surprised at what comes up, even if it sounds weird and wacky, but you just allow it fully and deeply. And again, just repeating the words, I will be unloved. I'll be unloved. I'll be unloved. And allow that emotion to move through and release from the body. And then again, you can stay curious. Is there any resistance to this? I'll be unloved. Is there anything that feels like it's saying this shouldn't be here in experience? Just feeling it out, feeling for anything that feels like it's pushing up against that I can't be unloved. And just allowing those words as well. Like, I don't want to feel like I'm unlovable, so I can't feel that, right? Exploring both sides and allowing the emotion to release. Another really good inquiry that I've found to be effective, especially for stubborn emotions that feel like it's quite tricky to connect to the words. But again, there's no hard and fast rule here. Sometimes I just feel like this inquiry just intuitively arises and it feels appropriate to recruit in that situation, which I would invite you to trust yourself with that as well. But what is the view of this emotion? So for example, let's say we have a bit of lingering sadness in the back of our neck or something like that, in our shoulders, in our arms. And it just feels like, it's hard to connect to, and all the other methods just haven't really worked for us. All the other inquiries just don't feel like they're connecting at all. We might try this one. What is the view of this emotion? as if it was the most real thing in the whole universe. You inhabit that emotional landscape. You soak yourself in it like a sponge. Just let that emotion really come forward and step right into it and just say, what is the view of this emotion? And just unfiltered, allow the words and the beliefs to come out. I don't want to feel this way. I'm so alone. I just can't be by myself. Whatever that emotion says, trust it. And again, trust your intuition. Come from a place of unknowing, from a clean slate every single time. And just allow those words, whatever feels most charged and whatever connects to that emotion the most deeply, that's what you allow. That's what you repeat over and over again until it releases from the body. And then again, staying curious for any resistance. Is there anything that says, no, this shouldn't be here? And then connect to that and allow that to release, collapsing both sides. Okay, the next inquiry. What is the utility of this emotion? Now, I mentioned at the start that there is the emotional pattern, there is the resistance, and then there is the utility. This might be one of the most important inquiries because what it does is it infuses our shadow work and our inquiry sessions with more heart. The heart part is so important. It takes it from being this rigid, dry process of trying to extract and get rid of emotional patterns to one of wanting to understand ourselves deeply, wanting to integrate and wanting to love ourselves rather than to fix a broken self, right? So I would encourage you, very importantly, very, very importantly, to recruit this inquiry as much as you can. Whenever you've assessed an emotional landscape, whenever you've explored it and you've explored the resistance and the emotional pattern, once that's done, so for example, I want to express anger, but don't express anger, right? And you explore both of them, they're released, right? What could that be doing for me? And you could pick either side, whichever one feels more charged. But what could not showing anger be doing for me in this instance? Again, just letting your intuition answer that question. And it could be like, it keeps me validated. It keeps me safe in experience. Because if I'm loud, I'll be the center of the room and everybody will judge me and reject me. Something like that. And you sort of just bathe in that appreciation, giving yourself loving kindness, giving yourself appreciation for that pattern and acceptance. So again, those are quite a few inquiries there. I would encourage you to pick one or two, take it out into daily life and experiment with it. So what does this emotion mean about me? And what's the worst that could happen would probably be good ones to start with. Probably utility as well, connecting to the utility. And if you can really connect to those, that is pretty good shadow work. That is pretty effective. That's really all you need. It doesn't need to be too complicated. But I would encourage you to come back to this video and reference the timestamps if you want to revisit one so that you can integrate it into your experience more deeply. A couple other very important notes that will help you and set the context for doing this work. When you connect to words that come up in your experience, just know that as you repeat them, as you allow the emotion to release, the body has a natural capacity that we have suppressed through the social matrix to not allow ourselves to do. It might shake, it might burp, it might twist, it might turn, it might rotate, and just whatever it does, just trust your body to release energy naturally, whatever it needs to do. Give yourself that permission and you'll find that this process goes a lot more smoothly. Also, if at any point you get overwhelmed, if there are certain emotions that come up for you, like, I just don't get it. I'm just not getting it is a common one that I see in clients that I work with, or total helplessness or fear and panic that come up that otherwise would overwhelm you. Just assure yourself that, you have what it takes to handle anything in your emotional landscape. You truly do. You have what it takes to feel. And what you might notice, if at any point an emotion becomes intense, you can just sort of feel and see if there's any resistance there. Just feel for that subtle layer of experience that's saying, this shouldn't be here. I don't want to feel this. I can't handle this. And if you just allow that, I can't handle this, I don't want to feel this, what you'll notice is that sensation might still be intense, but it softens the resistance to it that is pushing against it. And then once that resistance has collapsed a little bit, you've allowed that to move through, then you can come back to the fear or the intense emotion. And then you might use the question of, what does this emotion mean about me? Ultimately, if things do get too intense, because sometimes we can get into some very deep, emotionally repressed material. There's no denying it. So just be gentle with yourself. Be very gentle, slow, and patient. You don't need to go all the way down to the depths of emotional repression. In fact, that doesn't even work, because you have to go layer by layer. We have to work with what's in direct experience, because we can't just go right down to the depths of helplessness intellectually if we're not feeling it in the body, which won't allow for that release and that emotional integration that we're actually looking for. But if anything ever gets too intense as well, you can always ground yourself. I find if you wrap your arms around your chest, like you're giving yourself a hug, and just tapping is a good way just to give yourself that extra bit of support. And it can also help with emotional release as well. Or you could just notice the 5 sights around you, just opening your eyes, 5 sounds, just feel your feet on the ground and just connect to a vast open spaciousness of relaxing your attention outwardly and just assuring yourself that I can handle this. Now again, it's incredibly helpful to have a facilitator. I'll recommend that again. But with that, all that said, moving forward in the next video, what we're going to do is talk about the core, deeply held, repressed fears that we can connect to. When we know how to name certain fears that are arising in our experience, improving our emotional vocabulary, it can help give context for where it is that we're going with this work and what the implications are, which is very, very profound indeed. So I'll see you over in the next video. Make sure you like this if you found it helpful, and share it with your friends if you think they'll find it valuable too. And I'll see you in the next video.